Hello. To get the music out of there. That's jazzy beat, man. It's a zesty beat. That's what Sean would say.
If you say so.
It's a zesty beat. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, everybody.
Man, it's good to be here, Tim. How are you?
I'm peachy.
That's was the creepiest look you've ever given anybody. I'm gonna check our audio. Tim, greet everybody this morning and start talking.
So now I have to do the talking. Our audio always seems to be messed up, or mine does anyway. Seems like anyway.
Sounds like it's okay. All right. A couple of things to note if you're on the podcast. Typically, we stream to my personal Facebook page, our community group, and to the ministry Facebook page. But we learned last week we miss comments that way, because if you comment on the ministry page, I can't see them on my personal. If you comment in the community group, I can't see them. So we're just on my personal page and shared it to those other two locations, and we're also on YouTube Live if you want to peruse over there. So just kind of take note. That way, hopefully, we'll see all the comments from the exactly 0 people that are watching today. But if you do join us and you're a little bit into the show, let us know you're there. Make us a comment. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things today, actually. But a couple of things right off the top of the bat. This is March 1st today. March Madness Bible giveaway starts today. We're partnering with a ministry that I met the folks at Crossbrand. They're out of Lindale, called Real Vita TV. They actually have a podcast that goes onto the tablets that get handed to all Texas inmates for sure, but I mean, it's a nationwide deal.
Yeah.
And if you're incarcerated, you get a tablet, and there's certain things you can look at. Well, their podcast is on there, and they literally get thousands of letters a week from inmates across the country that are trying to follow Christ, giving their heart to the Lord through their podcast. Pretty incredible. They also physically go into the prison units here in Texas, hold services, do worship, and hand out Bibles. And so that's why we're partnering with them for this time. So everything that comes in the month of March goes to the March Madness Bible giveaway, and we'll partner with them. We're trying to work out a time to get Eve and Jeremy onto the show to talk about their ministry. We haven't been able to get our schedules to meet yet, but we've already had $500 from a local church has been donated to this particular cause. It's just a few miles from here, actually. I don't know if they want me to share their name, so I won't. But unless they might have kind of wanted to do it on the down low. But at any rate, so we got some seed money, and so if you would pray about that. Go to the website. I think I've got a URL for it up here. Just go to thecruciblesfire.org/donate, and in the drop down, it asks you what to give it to. And one, I think, says the area of greatest need, or if you could just designate the March Madness Bible giveaway, it'll get designated, and 100% of those funds will go to buying Bibles for the Real Vita TV ministry. We've also got some ministry merchandise. We've got a few of these hats left. Tim doesn't wear hats. He loves his balding head, but my head burns, and so I got a hat. And we just came out with a new. We've actually sold a couple of these shirts. Tim says it's a bit much for him, but about stumbling forward. It's got 2 Timothy 1:5-7. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. But as long
what's on the shirt isn't too much for me.
It's just too much shirt.
It's just a big billboard.
Tim's a shirt. Subtle soul. He's very underspoken and I'm
underappreciated too.
Yeah, but that's your own fault. All right. Today I got some shout outs. Hey, Heather Goodson and Bruce Lawrence.
Oh,
and I'm just shouting y'all out because y'all are watching, and it tells me. And I don't know if I'm supposed to, but I did. And so we're glad you are, and make us some comments if you're out there, and let us know you're here. Tim, I read a great book this last week, and Tim hasn't read it yet, but he's going to. He promised me he would, Didn't you? Didn't you promise me? No, you didn't promise. But
Sure.
I'm gonna twist his arm to get him to. And here's the reason, is because Tim and I talk incessantly and ad nauseum to the point of irritation for most about what it looks like to pursue the kingdom and what it looks like to pursue the Father and to be transformed into the image of Christ, and how a lot of times our church culture actually goes counter to what the scriptures would tell us is the way to get there. And it's this frustrating, can be this frustrating thing. But there's a book by a guy by the name of John Mark Comer, Comer, and it's called Practicing the Way. I will put a link to it in the comments when we get finished. I didn't even think about that till just now, but I'll put an Amazon link. I did it on Audible, and the guy reading it sounds kind of like what's the Bible Project guy? Tim Mackey. He sounds kind of like Tim Mackey. It's not Tim Mackey, but it's kind of this really soothing voice.
Kind of make you fall asleep when you're driving down the road.
It's not that. So it's not James Earl Jones. But it's just clear and articulate. Anyway, it's a really good reading. But what John Mark Comer does in this book, and he himself, I've listened to him on some podcasts, and he talks about how he just unapologetically quotes Dallas Willard in some of Dallas Willard's writings, like Surprised by Hope,
Divine Conspiracy.
And there's a third one that I just got, Marks of a Disciple or something like that. But it's he quotes him heavily. It's a lot of, and what's interesting to me about it is to stumble upon the writings of somebody who's like a legitimate somebody in the world. Like they write books and they have standing. And here's us, just Mutt and Jeff, who don't know anything, but that's saying the same things that we've been saying for a couple of decades, and trying to bring people into it was just exciting for me. And so I just want to encourage you to get the book, because it's almost like maybe we're not crazy.
Well, it's probably bigger than that too. So just for people listening, what was this cat's name?
John Mark Comer.
John Mark Comer. So I'm kind of a stuffy individual when it comes to reading. I don't read
Yes,
anybody that's contemporary. And it sounds like I have bents toward that, but without going into a long story. So he's heavily quoting a guy named Dallas Willard. Maybe you know him, maybe you don't. I didn't know who he was until Matt brought it up. He's passed away, but he was a super thinker.
He's actually a philosophy professor, I think, at the University of Southern California.
Yes, that's where he was. So, I mean, immediately you might think of that right now and go, oh, well, he's some liberal stooge. And how he was able to be there and do what he did, well, he was probably around back when Reagan was governor or something along those lines.
Oh, he wasn't as young as Tim.
Yeah, I'm not trying to put it in terms of politics. I'm just saying that the environment was different then, so he probably could. And it's not about being conservative or not either. Anyway, he speaks in depth, not like some heady, hard to read individual like John Stott. And I'm not talking ugly about John Stott, but somebody like John Stott, for me to read it, I have to read it.
Or even C.S. Lewis.
I have to reread it and reread it for it to sink in, because it's so deep and so good. And he uses words I don't know what they are, so it takes me a while to figure it out. But anyway, Dallas Willard can put things into a nominal language, and it's really captivating.
Yeah, it's really good.
And so, what was this guy's name again?
John Mark Comer.
Yeah, so how old is he, you think?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, he's still alive, writes this book, but he heavily quotes Dallas Willard in this. He was really captivated by this book, Divine Conspiracy. So I would tell you to read that as well, because it's a very practical function. And all the things we talk about the kingdom, Dallas Willard's able to take that and put it into, this is what it looks like to actually do something with it.
And what Tim's trying to say is he's better at explaining it than we are.
Oh yeah,
read
by
him.
Far.
Well, and what I loved about John Mark Comer's book was it's called Practicing the Way, and he kind of just strips down a lot of what we've built around what it looks like to be a Christian. I mean, one of the things that he says on repeat in the book, I mean, it's like irritatingly on repeat, honestly. And he even says that. He's like, I'm kind of tired of saying this, but here it is again, is that Jesus never invited anybody to come and convert to a new religion called Christianity, which is what we do in evangelicalism. You know,
Pretty much.
come convert, do the ABCs. And I'm not trashing. I'm just saying that's, if you're wanting to follow the model of what Jesus did, that's not what he did. What he did do, and he uses Dallas Willard's term, is he invited people to become an apprentice of him, which is what they would do in the time in the era of having rabbis. And you know, what's interesting is that in the time of Christ, if you were going to be a rabbi, like Paul was training to be a rabbi under Gamaliel. Mm-hmm. You know, all the young men would go to, there was a name for the school, and I can't call it to mind. You know, they would learn the scriptures and the Torah and all that stuff.
Their version of seminary.
Yeah, but when they were kids, they were young.
Yeah.
And then they'd get to a certain place, and either they went back to work, like Peter and them, James and John's case, went back to go fish, you know, with the family business. Or if they were the cream of the crop, they got picked to go on to rabbi school. And they got to go and pick and find a rabbi that would allow them to follow their ways and learn their ways. And what was interesting about Jesus' disciples is because of their station in life, what we know, because we know about their culture, is they weren't the cream of the crop. They had some training, and they had been raised in this culture of Judaism. But they weren't,
for all intent and purpose. It was a theocratic government of sorts. Yeah. I mean, the Romans were in charge, but the Jewish history, that's how they did life.
But they weren't rabbinical students.
No.
And so for Jesus to come to them in a rabbinical tradition and say, come follow me, be my apprentice, was one of these things that's, in that particular day, would have been jarring. It would be almost like Dallas Theological Seminary coming to me or Tim and going, hey, y'all want to come teach systematic theology? And we're like, I'm not even remotely qualified to go be a college professor. And I mean, I've got some advanced degrees, but I don't have that advanced of a degree to be a doctor or whatever at a theological seminary. I don't have the right degrees. Yeah. Could I go to a college and teach education? Yeah, I could, because I have my degrees in that. But it would be weird for somebody to come in and say, hey, Matt, why don't you come to the University of Southern California and teach physics? Yeah. Well, I'm not a physics major, and I can do math, but that's about it. And it was kind of along those lines. But what's interesting to me about it is what Jesus called them to was to come, and John Mark Comer does a great job of this in the book, is to do three things: be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. And he really breaks it down very simply in this book. And what hit me about that, Tim, is that that's the kind of stuff that you and I are always talking about. And when we say things like staring in the face of God, pursuing the face of God, what we're really talking about is just being with Jesus, being with the Father. Is that too simplistic for you?
No, it's not simplistic, but I know the thing that I'm always having to figure out is I hear this terminology, be with Jesus and do what Jesus does and what would Jesus do. We have a tendency to break this down into, okay, here they are and here's the steps. And I'm not beating this guy up. Everything that he's had in there, or that you said he had in there, I mean, it's good practical stuff. But the point of, and everything we've been talking about, even with deconstruction and all that kind of stuff that we've been dealing with, even when we were going through Corinthians, we're always trying to find out, we know the ways, and we say this is the way the kingdom wants us to do it. But we live here and now. And how does all the tragedy we deal with, and the jobs and the money, and how we walk and talk and act and what we want, right? In practical terms, How do you marry those two up? And so do what Jesus would do. Well, it seems pretty simplistic now to me that I read the stories of Jesus in the Gospels and I watch what he actually said and did and went and we just read that and we accept it for what it is. But I learned to observe that. So, example, Jesus was always running off to be by himself.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there because I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, so just an example, right? You might not pick that up when you read the story per se.
Right.
But if you're really trying to find out who this guy was, because he's not here with us, right? Oh, the Spirit, Tim. Yeah, that's not my point. My point is we don't have Jesus here like the disciples had Jesus here, right?
Exactly.
You could look and see and watch and go, where did Jesus go again? And you can kind of, he was always going off, so you can start thinking, well, those conversations transpired of some sort or another, right? So, and the point is, and we can say, well, he was off doing this and he's off doing that. That's true. You can read that and see that. But the point of it is in reality, like we're sitting here right now, why was he running off all the time to be by himself? And that opens up a whole category of starting to look and figure out, well, this guy's book, and Dallas Willard, and one of my big mentors is
Oswald
Chambers. Those guys bring that kind of stuff up, going, what was transpiring here? And a lot of other people do too. But I'm just saying, that's how you figure out those questions. Why was he even doing that stuff? And those are things that you, as you study the scriptures and stuff, picking out things like that you see, what is that? Why is this happening? Who is this person and why are they doing that? And taking it like it's real. It's happening right here, right now, and figuring out those questions, because that's how you start learning how to look God in the face and wrestle over things.
Well, one of the things that John Mark Comer pulls out in his book was something that we've talked about a million times, but the way he said it really impacted me. And he like I said, he broke it down in this kind of it's not a 3-step process, and he goes to great lengths in his book to say this is not formulaic, whatever, but it's just categories of behavior for the sake of conversation. Be with Jesus, be like Jesus, learn to be like Jesus, and then do what Jesus did. And you can see that pattern with the disciples. But his point was, we try to jump in and be like Jesus or do what Jesus did and bypass and short circuit the step of being with him. And
being with him means watching what he does. Or his mannerisms, his movement, what he sounds like when he talks, and that's learning how to do it.
And if you look at the way the disciples did it, and you look at what Jesus did, when he's talking about him running off, what was he doing? Well, he was being with the Father. Jesus says over and over again, I only do what I hear, do what the Father tells me to do. I say what the Spirit tells me to say, and that's it. But when he would retreat, that's what he was doing, is he was in prayer. He was in communion. I'm going to use a different word, because when I say he was in prayer, we automatically have this plate that we put over it and going, oh, he was knelt down somewhere with his eyes closed.
Well, we institutionalize the action.
Yeah. And it may be that he was sitting on a rock somewhere, staring up at the creation and the stars and the clouds, and because the glory of the Lord is in the heavens.
Well, I would even tell you that that's a lot of what he was doing.
And that's my point, is when we say things like looking into the face of God, it's not only looking at what Jesus did and analyzing his words, and that sometimes it just means sitting still, sitting quiet, if it's for a minute.
Yeah.
And thinking on, meditating on, concentrating your thoughts on. The way he says it in the book is sometimes you just want to watch the Father watch you with love.
So practical steps in doing in discipleship thing, this is kind of what we're getting at, because we get into practical steps and we start saying, well, that's institutionalized and we're getting following rules and all that. Yes, that can happen. But it's a learned process. And I don't mean that in a bad way. We're built to have to learn things. And so if you're a lazy Christian, don't mean any offense to anybody, If you're a lazy Christian, you go, well, Jesus has to do all that. I can't do it. Influences of the world. These are all minor little things, right? That can issue. You can't hardly find anybody that doesn't have one of these stuffed in their face all the time. Well, my point is spending time with the Lord. If you're a person that can sit around and stare at the sky all the time, that's a natural function for you. Other people got to be doing something all the time. So on one, it's a discipline to learn. The other one kind of comes by it naturally, but both of you need it. So, if you're one of these that, with our current culture with devices that you can have input coming in all the time, you have to learn to break away from that. This is just a simple discipline function of learning what it's like to just be empty, so to speak. Well, how does that got to do with staring God in the face? If you see Jesus doing it, and he had the hustle and bustle of the Roman culture and all that stuff going on around him all the time, he would break away to get away, even from the disciples.
Yeah, even from good work, even from good things.
From good work and good things, and just go, using a hippie term, he would just go be with the Father. So what does that mean? Well, go find out what that means. That's kind of my point in this. We can't give you all the answers for this stuff. That's spending time with the Father, and then these revelations and things, and reading this Comer guy or Oswald Chambers or whoever,
or Bonhoeffer or Willard, or
read these guys, and because they are examples of sorts, right? Are they perfect? No. As we watch the disciples go through that, right? They're with Jesus and they do bumbling stuff all the time. Well, I don't see that. Well, read the story and quit trying to make the perfectness of God come into all these things, and watch what happened to them. And then fast forward, they've spent time with Jesus, they watched what he did, and you can even read in there that they would emulate what he was doing. They didn't know why or anything, but they would do it.
Well, in John Mark's book, he breaks it, and I've heard this before. He did not come up with this. He quotes somebody, and I've heard this in the business world before, and he breaks down apprenticeship into 4 areas, and it's I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, you do, I watch.
Yeah.
And you can follow that pattern throughout the way Jesus disciples and apprentices his disciples. In the Gospels, he's doing and they're watching. And they're befuddled by half of it. What in the world is happening?
Yeah.
We don't have any food. Well, how many fish do you have?
I'm not laughing at them. I'm laughing with them.
Well, I mean, because I'm right
through
there.
that.
and then you see in Acts, they've moved into, or even at the end of the Gospels, you see them beginning to do and to help, or they help him do, and then they move into doing while Jesus is still here. They're healing, they're praying. You have Stephen even, beginning to do. It says he did mighty works and miracles. Even when he was just a deacon. But that's a different day. But then in Acts, you see them doing what Jesus did. They were doing the healing. They were doing whatever. And you see this progression. Wednesday night, I was teaching at Crossbrand out of 1 Peter. And Peter is wrapping up his book in 1 Peter, basically saying, because he's writing to the people that are in exile, saying, you're being persecuted. You've been called intentionally to this suffering. And he's like, your circumstances don't dictate who you are in Christ, the joy that you have. You're to be kind, and so he gives them all of these things that you're to reflect. Love one another, be humble, be compassionate, bless them, don't curse them, and he's giving them all this stuff. But back in Matthew chapter 16, when he was just getting started, Jesus was like, hey, I'm gonna be killed. Peter's like, you can almost see him drawing his sword. Not on my watch. He's like, I think he says like, it'll not be so. And that's when Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. He's like calling him the devil. But you see this progression of Peter cutting off Malchus's ear, trying to avoid suffering at all cost. And then you see this whole different tone in Peter, in 1st and 2nd Peter,
Yeah.
which is your suffering's coming, you've been brought to it, it's okay. Your circumstances don't dictate your joy, it's part of the drill. What's the change? Well, it's a process of what started with being with Jesus, then he was doing what Jesus did, or he was becoming what Jesus is, and then he started doing what Jesus did, which Jesus said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. He had compassion on people that hated him, and all of these things, because he was reflecting how the kingdom works.
Yes.
It wasn't.
That's the.
Tim and I were talking about. You go to the Sermon on the Mount was what we were talking about, and it's easy to get in there and go, okay, here's my list of things that real Christians do.
Yeah.
And we're on repeat saying, please, please, please do not approach the scriptures only as a list of things to do and not do. It's like we talked about in 1 Corinthians. Are there answers to some of our questions that are specific answers? Yes, there are. Are there specific things we should do and should not do? Yes, there are. But don't get bogged down in the weeds so far that you miss the whole story of all of those things are a means to an end, and the end is knowing the Father, knowing Jesus, becoming like him, and doing what he did. That's the goal.
Well, and Jesus lived here like the kingdom is, and all of Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, chapter-wise, a little bit more. He's explaining what the kingdom is like.
Right.
Here, now, and later.
Yeah, the already not yet,
And so,
theologians will call it.
And so, why even be a disciple? Why even pursue all this kind of stuff? This is the other kind of a crux of trying to go from this kingdom thing to how I'm living here right now. How am I even supposed to do all that? So the other side of that is or living here, and why would I even want to? So Jesus says, come and lay all your troubles on me. My burden is light and easy. And you're in here trying to do this Christian thing. You're going, this ain't easy.
Yeah.
Well, 9 times out of 10, you're stuck in the tension between living how you are and what you want, how you think it is, and then this kingdom thing, and you're trying to follow these rules. Well, you're doing the same thing on both ends, and it's frustrating and it's difficult. So, and I'm not telling you that from I've arrived. I know what it is. So you got Jesus telling you that. Do you believe it or do you not believe it? Do you want to be those things? Do you not want to be? And then you read Peter. So here's 2 Peter chapter 1 here. I'm going to read it in a New Living Translation. Verse 3. And it means something that Peter is writing this too. So that's a different conversation. So verse 3 it says, by his divine power, God has given us everything we need to live for living a godly life.
Right.
Remember what Jesus said? We have received all of this by coming to know him, the one who called us to himself by means of his marvelous glory and excellence. And because of his glory and excellence, he has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share his divine nature.
That's becoming like him.
And escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. So Peter's on the back end of his journey as we watch him walking with Jesus and all that kind of stuff, and then go through Acts to writing this. He's saying the exact same thing that Jesus was saying over there, and has lived the life. And so he's telling you, you can live this here and now.
Right.
And most of us are waiting for the Lord to drop this on us so that we have it already. Well, no, that's working out your salvation part, not salvation. But God's not gonna.
Let me jump in there, because here's a fallacy that we've taught, and I don't think it's intentional all the time.
Yeah, that happens.
It's not an intentional misteaching of the scriptures, but we think of salvation in terms of a moment in time and history, and a thing that happens to you one time.
Yeah.
There is an element of truth that can be in that, in the sense that, is there a time when I intentionally said I'm going to follow Christ? When he said to Matthew, come and follow me, He got up from his table and he left and he went and followed Jesus. We need a moment. But the scriptures also teach that we are being saved.
Yeah.
That it's a process, not necessarily, because we think of it in terms of are we in or are we out? And I just want to encourage people, that's actually the wrong way to think about it. From the text, it's are you walking after, and John Mark Comer would say, and Dallas Willard, are you apprenticing after Jesus? And one of the things that he pulled out that I really appreciated about this, and I once he said the words, I look into our church, and I know you don't like the word culture, but the current church culture that we live in, evangelical culture, we do it all the time. And he said, everybody wants to start the process where you want to be instead of where you are.
Yeah.
And it was just like this light bulb came on, and he gave several analogies, but it's like if you want to lift weights, you want to get stronger. Let's just say you have a goal of, I want to be able to bench press 200 pounds. Well, you don't load 200 pounds on the bar and lay down and try to get after it. Because if you've got some strength, you might get it up off the bench.
Yeah.
But you're probably going to break your throat as it falls on you and decapitates you on the bench because you can't yet handle it. So what do? You start with 20 pounds, 50 pounds, whatever you can do, and you start there.
Well, and that's identifying where you are, and maybe you don't even know where you are, but you know you're not that. Well,
but you got to want to be that.
You got to want to be it. Yeah, that's the point. I'm going to back up on the salvation thing. I do. Well, I do. I know you do too. There is a point in salvation when the Lord reveals himself to you and says, I am, and I'm real. Here I am.
Yeah.
Want it or not?
Exactly.
And you go, yes, I do. Well, that's simplistic. But that's the salvation, what he has done, or at least as I see it and as what my experience is. Experience isn't always the big marker. He changed my nature.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't grasp the things of the kingdom unless he did that. But then I could see the distinct difference between what I wanted, whether it was evil or not, and kingdom. So after that, that's what Hebrews talks about, working out your salvation with fear and trembling, is learning, becoming a student, a disciple, whatever term you want to use. And in its essence, you have to look at where you want to go or where you think you want to go, realize the fact that's not where I'm at. And a lot of us try to dress up and be those things. Good Lord, everybody wants to dress up and look like a SEAL Team 6 operator out there if you're into guns and gear. And think that's, if I have all this, then I'm that. No, that's not what's happening. Just accept the fact of where you are. And you don't have to like where you are.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be better if I was that.
Maybe.
That in itself is a discipline to come down and go, this is where I am. For better or worse, whatever that is, but I want to be that. And say, Lord, I want to be that. And then start struggling through what that is. Put that 5-pound weight on and
just get after
go to town with it. To get to the 200-pound weight, it takes time.
Yeah.
And here's the other side. You're not a real Christian once you get to that point.
Right.
You're a real Christian right now if you're pursuing that, even if you're not right all the time.
Well, and it's interesting too.
And it's okay to be that way.
If you watch what Jesus did, and one of the things, again, Willard talks about this all the time too. Dallas Willard does. John Mark Comer does. We've talked about it a million times. Jesus made an appeal. Come follow me. That's it. Not everybody answered that appeal.
Well, and some would follow.
And some would.
And then they would decide,
wait, you're getting ahead of me. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point. You find this in John, particularly one great story. Some would say no from the get-go. And what did he do? He let them go.
Yeah.
He let them say no. The parable of the sower. He sowed the seed. He didn't chase the seed into the rocky ground and on the pathway and think, oh my goodness, I got to throw it over here on the good ground. He just continued to sow the seed. If it was received, it was received. If it was not, it was not. Paul does this. He went and he would preach. They would reject him. What did he do? He went to the edge of the city. He dusted his shoes off symbolically and said, they made their choice, and he'd go to the next one. That's not discompassionate. It's just,
It's not on him.
It's not on him. It's just
Yeah.
like, that's not our
And
guy.
he understood that.
And Jesus did that. But like what Tim is alluding to here in John, we see a great picture of it. People would say, yes, Jesus, I will follow you. And they would follow him for a while.
Yeah.
And John is a story, and I can't remember the chapter. I always want to say it's in John 16, but I don't think that's right. Then I didn't have time to look it up. And there's this multitude, it says. That's a lot of people, probably thousands. And he turns to the crowd and he says, if you want to follow me, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And it freaked everybody. It even freaked the disciples out. And they're having this conversation because it says that many of them, like the multitude, like most of them, turned away, left, never to follow him again.
So a practical aspect of that in real life. The disciples are following Jesus. They're with him. He makes that statement out of a frustration function that's going on. Now the disciples are in real life where people are going, you really going to follow that guy?
Yeah.
That's where you just got to start. And you know what? God works out all kinds of things like that where it makes you have to look and just, you're to
Crossroads, crisis of faith.
you could, Henry Blackaby says a crisis of faith. I do know it's real.
And
I'm going to keep following, or no, I'm going to look like I'm following it, but I'm going to do what I want.
Well, and we encounter tens of thousands of these miniature crises of faith throughout our life.
Oh yeah, and you're going to.
And you know, we've experienced. I have to talk about it all the time. It seems like, but I mean, there've been moments in our history with Brenna, with our foster children, with the death of our son, in those moments, the faith that we're carrying at that moment bumps smooth into the reality of what's happening.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem that the faith that I have at that moment is enough to handle whatever situation is. And there has to be a decision that I believe is empowered by the Holy Spirit to say, no, I do believe what I have declared. I do believe the creed that I'm following. I do believe the words that Jesus has said. And therefore, I don't have any answers to the problem, but I know the guy who I trust to figure it all out for me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean to solve my problem. I can't turn my face to even the solution because there isn't one. I have to turn my face to him. And it's in that moment that some serious strides get made towards maturity in Christ. When you say, nothing about my material world, nothing about my situation says to me, this is an awesome path to follow. It's just the right path because I believe what I believe. And when you push through that, through the power of the Spirit, what you find on the other side is incredible depth of knowledge, more knowledge of who he is, and you find yourself being transformed more into his image. And we want to get to the doing what he did part. Remember the What Would Jesus Do campaign back in the 90s? Everybody wants to start with what would Jesus do without getting into but I want to be with Jesus and become like he is part. You can't get to the doing what Jesus did and skip these other two parts.
It's developed over time.
It's developed over time.
It's recognizing somebody and knowing, oh, well, that's what they do.
And that I like that story in John because the crowd said, I can't follow this anymore. And you know, and what they said was, this teaching is too hard for us. It's too much.
Yeah.
And I don't, it's not even, and the words it says I can't, but the subtext of that is I don't want to.
Well, yeah. So you're going back on your own wisdom on that kind of stuff.
Exactly. This doesn't make sense, so I can't follow it.
And what you might as well say is I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And
well, they didn't. They left.
No, and that's right. They did. But I guarantee you there was a lot of them still running around on the fence. That's back into that tension between the old self and knowing what's going on in the new place. And you won't ever commit.
Nicodemus did that. Not Nicodemus, the rich young ruler did that.
The rich young ruler did that. And you won't commit. And so, yes, you're going to live in this tension that's terrible, because if you do it the other way, you follow this one, that's when what Peter's talking about here, he gives you all that.
Yeah.
It's peace through turmoil and knowing all those things.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, you start trying to define, this is a little off topic, but in a simpler self, you have this picture in your head of what God is like and what he'd do. You know, we talk about love a lot, and love becomes the object and not really the guy with it. But you read in the Old Testament, you know, like poor Job got his teeth kicked in and there was nothing wrong with him. And you look at Hosea, who God told him, go marry that prostitute.
Yeah.
And she didn't convert and come in. She kept living the prostitute life, whatever that is. My God would never do something like that. And so you get stuck in this place where you have to decide, would he really do something like that?
Well, and here's a subtle shift that our culture has taken on that I want to just caution people about. And you said the word, people say, my God would not do that. I want you to really hear what I'm about to say is your God, whatever it is that you're worshiping, might not, but the God of the Bible did do something like that.
And you have to come to terms with that, and that's difficult. Say, well, he wouldn't make me do that. Well, evidently he would, because all the scriptural history, you run into this.
Right.
I find myself stuck in the position of John the Baptist's disciples. Man, when you read that story, those poor guys are unbelievably squeezed in life, and we never find out what really happened to them.
Yeah. Well, I saw a deal, you know, well, in the story that we're talking about where Jesus says, you have to drink my blood, eat my flesh, and everybody leaves, is a great picture of Matthew 7, when the narrow path that leads to righteousness. Because in that one story, there's just throngs of people. And when it got hard, this saying, this teaching is too hard, they said, I'm not in for hard. I wanted the food and the healing. I didn't want this part. And so
I wanted to be able to bring food and healing to others.
Yeah, without being with Jesus.
Yeah.
So they would leave. But then Jesus turns to the disciples and he says, are you going to leave too? And I love what Peter says in response, because this is early on in the walk. And it's exasperation, it's love, it's compassion, it's emptiness. And he says, where else are we going to go? You have the words of life.
But that's a picture of somebody who has made the decision that I'm going to follow that.
No matter what.
And he's at a place where he's going, but this is a hard place to follow that.
Exactly.
And the Spirit confirms to him in the manner that God has done through the Old Testament too, that he was able to he made a conscious decision. You are the guy that has all these answers that I still don't know and understand that, but I have found that this is true.
Yeah.
In what little I have walked, so I will continue to walk.
Well, and what gets me about Peter, we get so frustrated that we're not doing what Jesus did, that we're not doing what the apostles did in Acts even, for that matter, healing or whatever. Just fill in the blank of whatever it is you think is the thing that makes you a mature Christian. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. You go from that guy to 1 Peter, who's saying, oh, there's joy in suffering.
Oh, yeah.
Just embrace it. Love those people that are whacking you over the head, and you bless them. The stark contrast between those two ends of the spectrum we can see. But you can't lose sight of what happened in the middle.
Yeah.
And all along the way when Peter, because there is a story in there, you remember when he comes to meet with the boys from Jerusalem and he's acting like a bigot against all the Gentiles? So it's not like it was a rosy path from denial to embracing suffering. There was bobbles along the road. And
that's Paul the real life of the movement.
Yeah. And when he did that, when he was acting like a racist and, you know, being all Jewish and everything, and God wasn't standing back going, oh man, I lost Peter. This thing's coming off the wheels, you know, and Peter's gone. He was like a dad going, Peter's such a knucklehead. He's going to come through this. He's going to be okay. But that's why I got Paul down there to bust his chops, you know.
And bust his chops
he did. But my point is, we all want to get to 1 Peter. It's an admirable goal.
It is.
But you can't get to 1 Peter without going through the Gospels and Acts. And I don't mean in a chronological reading order. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about our walk. When we say things like, you've got to stare into God's face, that's in direct response to life is going to come in conflict with whatever level of faith that you currently have.
Yeah.
On a regular basis. But it's designed that way. And Hebrews says in chapter 5 and verse 8 that even Jesus had to learn obedience, and he did it by that which he suffered.
Yeah.
If Jesus had to learn and it was a process, and I shared this at the church a few weeks ago, when you see him at 12 teaching in the temple, don't over spiritualize that.
Yeah.
Jesus, the man-child, yes, he was God, but he was also a man-child, was not where he was supposed to be at the time. He was supposed to be on the camel train headed 3 days out of town. Did he sin in that? No, there was no sin in it. It's just called navigating this thing called humanity. When he's in the garden telling the disciples to pray and they go to sleep right before, and he's asking God if we can do something else, he had doubt. He had desire to do something other than what God was wanting to do. Did he sin? No, it's his humanity.
Yeah.
And when he comes to the disciples and he says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, he's not there pronouncing that as an indictment against them because they couldn't stay awake. What he's saying is I needed you to pray for me because my flesh is weak.
Yeah.
That's Jesus, the God-man, saying the humanity part of me is weak right now, and I need you to pray for me. So if Jesus is saying that, how much, and it was, if Jesus had to go through a process, how much more should we not be surprised when we have to go through a process? And so my encouragement, we gotta land the plane. My encouragement to you today, and I'm a little worked up because I'm passionate about this, is, and I wish somebody would have told me this 30 years ago. You can't get to the end without going through it.
Yeah.
You've got to get to the being okay with being with Jesus. What does that look like for you? Here's what I want to give you something practical. When we developed the 3x5 Bible study method, it was in direct response to some ladies with young children saying, I don't have time to read my Bible and I want to study. And it's like, okay, if you're on a read your Bible in a year program, you're going to read 6 or 7 chapters a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes in those are all going to be in Leviticus, and you're going to be poking your eyes out and wondering if you're going to make it through. If you're a mom with a bunch of small kids, or like in our situation with Brenna with special needs, and you know what? You don't have 45 minutes to pack through in a day. You may not, but you might have 1 or 5. And you can take one verse. Our deal says has 5 verses a day. Spread that puppy out over 24 hours. If it takes you 3 days, so what? Stumble forward. If it takes you that long to get through it, so what? You start where you are, because the goal is being with Jesus. The goal is not marking your belt to be this great Christian that you think or somebody's told you you're supposed to be. I almost want to tell people to scrap their reading plans. Unless they're really doing it well, don't worry about it. Because here's what happens to me when I go to read the Bible in a year. Have I done it? I have. Have I completed it? Yeah. But it was tough, man. It was not in my nature, which is actually a good reason to make myself do it.
Yeah.
That's a whole different day of talking it. But there'll be times when I'm reading, I'm on the 2nd chapter of 7, and I come across something that just resonates with me, and I got to stop on it, man. And it may be 3 days on a verse that I'm just soaking. For me, I like to get a cup of coffee and just sit there in the quiet, or to sit around a coffee table with Tim and some friends and talk about the kingdom. That's how my wife is more solitude than that, or likes more solitude. She does her, early on in our marriage, I thought if I don't sit down and we're not doing a Bible study together, then we're not a good Christian couple.
Yeah.
But you know what the truth is? She needs to do that on her own, because that's how she's wired.
Well, and that whole mindset is learned.
It is.
That's the point. You're going to go through different things like that. Pursue it. That's why we even said sometimes you might even find out you were completely wrong.
It's okay.
You might go 10 years before you figured out you were wrong. That's stumbling forward. God appreciates that.
But what the disciples did that the multitude did not is they made a decision to follow Jesus. That's the only decision they really understood at the time. Yeah. Is they stuck with him because he has the words of life. All of the programs in the world, and we talked about this a while ago before we got on the air, we slam church programs sometimes, and that's not necessarily a good thing. they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them unless they become your end goal and they become the be all and everything and a formula for if you'll just do X, Y, and Z, you'll get to the end and be doing the things that Jesus did. It might work for some people that way. It's not going to work for everybody. Here's my you got to go get the book Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. Just go read the dang book. And I'm telling you, if you're searching for what does it look like for me in my life to follow the way of Christ, that book will help you because it's going to give you permission to start where you are.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell you to start where you are. I need to memorize more scripture, but it's really hard for me. Well, can you do one a week? Do one a week. You know, don't let somebody tell you got to do 10 a week or you're not a real Christian. Okay? Start where you are. I need to pray an hour a day. Well, I don't have an hour a day. Well, pray for 5 minutes a day. Focused prayer. Pray for 1 minute a day if that's all you got. If you live out here and you're going to Walmart, that's 15 minutes in the car.
Yeah.
Okay? Shut the radio off and just be with the Lord. Or turn the radio on if you're wired that way and commune with God. I learned some of this the first time Brenna was put on a helicopter. She was about 6 or 8 months old. We had her home from the hospital, and she had her first seizure, and it lasted like 5 minutes. Mm. She started having a seizure. The ambulance came out, and they put her on the ambulance. Not the ambulance. They called the helicopter in, and they put her on the helicopter. She's still having the seizure at this point. I mean, she just wouldn't come out of it, and she was in bad shape. And they're like, okay, we're going to take her to Medical City. We go, and they're like, Tammy was like, I'm going with you. And they're like, no, you don't get to do that. And so we handed them her notebook of diagnosis and all the stuff that's going on. And the helicopter pilot's like, okay, get in. I need you there. And he was like, but if you go crazy on me, I'm going to set this bird down in the middle of a pasture, put you out, and continue without you. So we go. Well, my job then was to meet them at the hospital. I had no idea if this baby was alive. I didn't even know that the helicopter had ever made it. Did it crash? But I'm in from here to Dallas. It's an hour and 40 minutes, hour and 50 minutes from the time they took off till I got there. Totally alone, was not on my phone. Didn't know if my daughter was alive or dead. It was some of the most sweet fellowship that I've ever had with God in that time going to the hospital. And then I felt guilty about it later because I was supposed to be worried and I'm supposed to be a basket case, and I was, and I cried the whole way up there. But there was such a sweetness of being with him and asking him to let her live, and singing out loud and just being with Christ. It literally changed the trajectory of my walk, because that day I figured out that being with him is the goal.
Yeah.
Not even having my prayer answers. I remember when I got there and I'm walking into the emergency room not knowing if she made it. Being okay.
Yeah.
That if she wasn't, it was going to be okay. Because he has the words of life. And I never got over that. And that's what I want you guys to understand, is for all of the stuff that we do, and we want to do what Jesus did, and we want to feed the poor, and we want to heal the sick, and we want to do all those things. He says you can do all those things. But you don't get to do that if you're not willing to be with him.
Yeah.
And sometimes he's going to wreck your world. And he's going to take everything that you hold dear so that you understand that those aren't the things that get you down there. He's the one.
Yeah, and you can't measure that statement from a human perspective.
You can't.
Because it seems cruel. But when he does it, it's not cruel. And that's a learned thing.
It is. And so I wanted to get into 1 Peter chapter 1 today. We didn't do it. But down in verse 5, and what the whole stumble forward thing is about, is I'm working on a sermon. It's actually a series of, and it's simply just called Your Faith Is Not Enough. and I'm sorry for the sola fide guys out there. Faith is enough. You are saved by faith. Faith is enough to you follow Christ in faith, and that makes you part of the family. Don't hear me wrong, but it's not enough to be mature.
Yeah.
He says, add to your faith knowledge and self-control, and there's a whole list of things I don't have time to go into in 1 Peter 5-7, 1:5-7. And maturity in Christ is a whole different animal than just being saved.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing scholars say, Willard says it, Bonhoeffer said it, Oswald Chambers says it, Comer is saying it. There's not two things of salvation and discipleship. They're not two things.
Yeah.
Being saved is to be an apprentice of Jesus,
Yeah.
and to become like he is. If you're not on that path, then you're not following him. Then you're part of the group that when it gets tough is probably going to bail.
And you're going to live in constant difficulty.
Constant.
Like the kind that brings on depression and all kinds of other stuff.
And so my appeal to you is simply this. If you feel frustrated, like Tim's talking about, if you're in that and you're frustrated, and maybe you're even at the precipice of deconstruction, like we've been talking about. If that's where you are, you probably need to roll back and learn how to be with him.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you? I got no idea. Okay? I don't know. If I was sitting across from you at a counseling table and you were asking me for practical advice, I would say, I don't know, but get up early one morning on purpose to go sit out on the porch or sit in your bedroom or wherever you can be quiet, and you ask him.
Yeah.
And just sit there and be with him. If you need to play music, read a scripture, whatever, but with the intentional purpose of just saying, Lord, I don't even know what it looks like to be with you, but I want to be with you, so I'm going to be with you. On the authority of God's word, and I believe the authority of his spirit, I'll tell you, he'll meet you there. And I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but he will.
Yeah.
So, good stuff. Sorry I just get passionate about it, but if you haven't learned to be with him, you don't really know what you're missing. I guess that's kind of what I want to say. And it's not just an emotional hoorah time. It's
Yeah.
you're not going to make
substantive on it.
You're not going to make it through. Well, this afternoon we're going to sit down with the district attorney to talk about what's going on with my son's case, and he was killed in July. You don't get through those times on your own. You need him. There's a brother watching who just lost his wife, and long time was a teacher of ours, and you don't get through those on your own. You need him, and he's good. And you've got to believe that. March Madness Bible giveaway. Please head out to, if the Lord would lead you to, head out to the cruciblesfire.org/donate and choose the March Madness Bible giveaway. Help us to partner with Real Vita TV as they go into the prisons. We'd love to have you as monthly financial support if the Lord would lead you to that. All of this is crowd-funded and paid for, and there's quite a bit of expense in it in making it happen. If you like a shirt, they're available on our website, at the store, or hats are also available. We have a limited supply of those. I think we got about 10 of those left. If you'd like one, we'll get it shipped out to you. If you would be interested in having Tim and I come in and do a Bible study training for you, it looks like, I didn't know if I told you this or not, we're going to do one coming up in June. We've got one coming up with Lauren and her group. And if you've got a small group, Sunday school, entire church, or a group of 3 guys that want to learn how to study the scriptures, we'll come and we'll do it. People always ask, what do you charge? We don't charge anything. If you want us to come, we'll come. We'll find a date that we'll come and spend a Saturday with your entire church, your group, or whoever you can put together. If you want us to come, we'll come. And we won't charge you a dime, and we'll provide all the materials, and we'll come show you how to dig into God's word and learn to be with him. We love you guys. I appreciate y'all watching. Share the podcast. Invite your friends. Tell somebody about Jesus, all that kind of Christian stuff you're supposed to do. You got anything else before we go?
Nope.
Guys, we love you. We appreciate you. We'll see y'all on the backside. Let me see if I can get out of here now. Bye, y'all. I don't know if that's
We're taking applications for a new show host, and the pay is really good.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, it's real. You can put all the zeros.